So I wanted to show you a few pictures of what I was talking about with the asylum movement. So this is kind of a little bit of a hodgepodge. I'm going to start first off. So a couple years ago, we went to Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. This is your classic example of an asylum that was intended, it was a prison. So it's part of that penitentiary system. The idea for this first started in 1830. I want to say they completed construction around the 1840s. But you really get a sense for kind of how the initial idea of the penitentiary system started. Understand that this is very different from the way it used to be when they would have basically large rooms that they would keep people in, barely throw them any food, this kind of thing. This was the idea about kind of penitent. Think, reform. That's where we get the word penitentiary from. So just kind of understand that the attitude about how to address people that were breaking the law or people that were mentally ill or whatever changes in the early 1800s. And of course, the Eastern State Penitentiary, if you ever get a chance to go to Philadelphia, fascinating, like it's super spooky. It's what they call a maintained ruin. So it's left in its state of ruin and decomposition with the exception of a few areas with the intent of kind of giving you a sense for how the building was made and all that kind of stuff. It has kind of this castle facade to it, if you will. This is, of course, the entrance to what it looked like. Of course, this particular prison was used, I think, up through the 1960s when they finally quit using it. So some of the structures have been modified. So it's not ideally the way it looked in the 1830s. So this picture right here that I took gives you an idea of what a prison looked like before the Eastern State Penitentiary. Again, a large room with bunks that were really basically just a free-for-all for anybody who was thrown into jail. There was no effort in reform. It was basically you serve your time and then you get out. We don't try to rehabilitate people and that kind of thing. But then they come up with this idea of the Eastern State Penitentiary, which is where they come up with this notion that will allow people kind of the chance to go into a room to reflect on their crimes. So this is kind of a cutaway of the room. So this is the exercise area. Prisoners were kept isolated, and they would have a very, very kind of sparse room. This is where they would actually like put food through to them. This kind of shows you what I mean. Again, very, very minimal kind of place. Very little contact with other people. This room has kind of been renovated so that you have an idea of what it looked like. This one is not a renovated room. Again, kind of pictures of the doors. This was part of what Jeremy Bentham talked about as the panopticon, where you could sit in the center and you could see down the different hallways, if you will, to get a sense for, what was going on. So, just kind of, you could see all, if you will, and you see what I mean by this panopticon. So the jailers would be in the center. They could view down the hall. There you have your different cells. That was the initial intent, if you will. They typically had 2 floors. You can see here just various buildings. This is from the 2nd floor. And yes, this would have been the walkway. This would have been the cells. Here's another particular gate. And then this shows you kind of part of the yard. This is another building from the outside. This is from when I went to Williamsburg. So in Williamsburg, we went to a mental health exhibit as part of our extension about Dorothea Dix and kind of what she was doing. And you can see the difference. So this would be for the mentally ill. And this is how they would have treated them in 1773. Basically chained them to the wall and left them alone, out of sight, out of mind, if you will. Pretty horrific, right? By 1845, the idea was about kind of creating a much more structured setting. And so you begin to have like this, kind of an apartment kind of feeling, wire mesh so they could observe what people were doing. And you can definitely see this kind of gives you an idea about the casebook, what would have happened to somebody who was mentally ill. They would have been encouraged to play music, to draw, to write, to do whatever that seemed to ease their mind, if you will. This is another part of the exhibit that showed some different tools that they would use to kind of control people, especially those that were violently mentally ill. This is where the straitjacket comes from. Of course, the straitjacket is perceived as being humane and being something that was more beneficial than chaining somebody to a wall, if you will. This was another way where they would basically lock people into like a box to kind of keep them confined, to calm them down, if you will. And of course, this particular actress did a portrayal of Dorothea Dix, talking about her passion for trying to fix the situation for people that were mentally ill and people that were treated terribly, and terrible stories about women that had been attacked in these large facilities. Just really, really horrific stories with Dorothea Dix. So I just kind of wanted to point that out to you to kind of extend out what I meant by the asylum movement. Again, remember the asylum movement sees this change from the orphanages, the jails, into kind of focusing on reform. Again, making the world a better place. And so people like Dorothea Dix would definitely be